We're moving on to our next story here, and this is about Representative Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders. So, very interesting take here. There seems to be a shift that is happening. I talked to you before about that list for those that have actually called for a ceasefire. There's actually an account on Twitter called Ceasefire Tracker, and they're tracking everyone that calls for a ceasefire, not just politicians. Well, recently, apparently, Ro Khanna has now called for a ceasefire. I kid you not. So this is the account here. Ceasefire Tracker, breaking news. Representative Ro Khanna has just joined the call for a ceasefire. So we have to remember just a couple of days ago, Ro Khanna would not call for a ceasefire. In an interview that he had recently, he said he was not willing to do that. He said that, this is not the time to call for a ceasefire. We got to get the hostages back, yada, yada. So he was not in favor of doing that. What changed? I think the pressure of the protest, I think the pressure of some of his colleagues that have signed on to that list to call for a ceasefire. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if he got permission, if he got permission to go ahead and call for a ceasefire. This is his statement that he issued. I want to go ahead and share this here. He said, hopeful 50 hostages will be released and multi-day ceasefire. Every American, Israeli, and innocent hostage must be released. Once deal, the ceasefire should be permanent. So all hostages are released, aid gets in, the violence ends. October 7 perpetrators face justice and the rebuilding begins. So what I thought was interesting here is that not only did he call for a ceasefire, but he said that the ceasefire should actually be permanent. Not everyone's saying that, by the way. Not everyone that's calling for a ceasefire is saying it should be permanent. So it makes me wonder again, who gave Ro Khanna the okay to call for a ceasefire? Where was Ro Khanna when a lot of his colleagues had already done this very early on? He goes on to say here, he shows a picture here. He's sharing the article about the hostages. So he was sharing that as well. And Khaled said, it wouldn't hurt to start mentioning Palestinians in your tweets. Very upsetting. Yeah, so that's the other thing too, because he's calling for a ceasefire to be permanent. But if you notice, he will not mention the word Palestinians. He'll mention Israeli. He's even said innocent hostage, but he's not mentioning the Palestinian people at all. And that's very telling, right? Maybe Biden, what is this, Valerie? Maybe Biden's polling. Maybe that has something to do with it. Because again, like I said, Joe Biden has already lost the Arab community in the United States, which he does need that in Michigan in order to win. So there's been somewhat of a change there for him because he said he would not call for a ceasefire. And now he is. So he changed course there. But there was also, let me see if I can find, because I forgot to add this. There was a call. There was a video that went out. Let's see if I can find it. And it was Ro Khanna. There was a woman on a call with Ro Khanna. I'll try to see if I can find it. Let me see. It was a phone call. It's hard to find it now. I'll try to check and see if I can find it later. But let's go ahead and go on to Bernie Sanders, because these two are connected. So Bernie Sanders also, he didn't go as far as to say the word ceasefire. He's still not saying the word ceasefire, But apparently he's calling to this, and this is from Case Study QB. Bernie Sanders calls for conditions on military aid to Israel. So he's actually putting forth some type of conditions towards them now. Into indiscriminate bombing in Gaza, right of displaced Gazans to return home, no longer term Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. Representative Josh Gottheimer is not okay with this. So look at what he's calling for: to end indiscriminate bombing in Gaza, right of displaced Gazans to return home, and no longer term Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. Let's listen to this clip here from Case Study QB.
So there's a new fight kind of brewing up right now over aid to Israel, this time between Democrats, and a new call by one top Democrat to impose conditions on U.S. aid to Israel. Senator Bernie Sanders coming out now to say Benjamin Netanyahu and his government must understand, quote, not a penny will be coming to Israel from the U.S. unless there is a fundamental change in their military and political positions. The U.S. sends billions of dollars, to Israel every year, and Congress is currently struggling over sending an additional $14 billion requested by President Biden. And here is what Sanders wants in terms of conditions before more money is sent: a pause in military operations and an end to what he calls indiscriminate bombing in Gaza. He's also called for protecting the rights of Gazans to return home, and also that Israel commit to no long-term Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. One Democrat that is not sitting well with, New Jersey Democrat Congressman Josh Gottheimer, who said that those conditions and conditions like that would help Hamas in their goal of completely annihilating Israel and the Jewish people. It would weaken America's national security and our fight against terror. It comes as a new poll shows that while a majority of voters, all voters, 55%, say they support U.S. aid to Israel, almost half of Democrats in a new poll by NBC News says that they are opposed to it.
All right, let's pause here for just a second because I do want you to see this. 51% said Israel has gone too far. These are Democrats. These are Democrat voters. 27% says Israel action is justified. 49% opposed to U.S. aid to Israel. But the majority of Democrats have said that they've gone too far. Let's continue.
Joining me right now, Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer for more on this. Thanks for coming in. Why do you think Bernie Sanders is wrong on the conditions that he's asking for?
Well, after one of the leading terrorist organizations in the world has attacked Israel and killed Americans and has Americans and others hostage still right now, the idea that we would do anything to help a terrorist organization, Hamas, that's Iranian-backed, actually get a leg up makes zero sense to me. And they still have Americans hostage, just to be very clear. And the leadership of Hamas has said publicly that they will be a second, third, and fourth October 7th. In other words, until every Jewish person, until Israel is destroyed, as is in Hamas's charter, they're not going to stop. So I wouldn't know why we would do anything to back off crushing and killing the terrorists, as the president or commander-in-chief has said. We've got to keep that up, as well as part of our other goals, which is getting, of course, all the hostages home, including the American hostages, and making sure that we get humanitarian aid into the region. And Hamas is the one that's literally putting innocent Palestinians in harm's way, right? So understand, they've made it clear that they're not interested at all in protecting Palestinians. They're using them as human shields. They're not letting them go into any tunnels that they've built to protect Palestinians, right?
They're still using the human shields lie. Oz says Gottheimer is a shill and a coward. Yeah, he's still using that human shields lie. Also, notice he's not going to mention that Israel built the tunnels underneath Al-Shifa Hospital.
They just want to use them as human shields. That's what they're continuing to do.
But in your statement, I mean, you made clear that putting conditions on any aid only serves to help Hamas, what you're saying here. And I know you're not suggesting that that is the intention of progressives like Bernie Sanders to help Hamas. What do you think then is the intention in your mind? If it is so clear cut from your perspective that putting conditions on leads to Hamas benefiting, where is the discussion then, and where should the discussion be, do you think, in order to get past this?
Well, I really can't speak the intent of my colleagues. All I would say is we know the facts. We know that Hamas butchered, raped, killed 1,200 innocent people, including scores of Americans on October 7th. We know that they are literally have military bases underneath hospitals. We know that they are using innocent Palestinians as shields. And I believe we must continue to do everything we can to get humanitarian aid in there, which Hamas is blocking. Why would we do anything to support a terrorist organization that's Iranian-backed? We see the Houthis literally capturing, which is Iranian-backed, capturing a ship, holding people hostage, right? And firing rockets, as others are in Iraq and Syria doing, at Americans, right? And Israelis, right? So they're all attacking us. They're Iranian-backed. And so China, Russia, Hamas, they're all working, Iran, all working together against America and against our key ally, the democracy in the region. Why would we do anything to actually hinder our objectives, our commander-in-chief's objectives?
I want to ask you, I mentioned some new polling out and what it says, kind of where the temperature is right now amongst U.S. voters with regard to President Biden's handling of foreign policy, the war in Israel, and also kind of just his approval overall. This new NBC News poll shows that there is some trouble among Democratic voters for President Biden when it comes to this. According to this poll, among Democrats, 51% think Israel has gone too far in its military action. 27% Israel's actions are justified. 49% are opposed to the U.S. sending more aid to Israel. When you see polling like that, how much does that worry you?
So I dug a little deeper into that poll, as you have to in these polls. I thought the most interesting finding in the poll, which actually everyone should look at, is that 77% of Democratic primary voters support the president in that poll. That's his highest number yet since he's in office. And if you look even at the poll as well about favorability, Hamas is at 1%, the lowest, and Israel, when you ask favorability in a set of choices, is at the highest. So
there's a difference between Israel, Hamas, and the civilians, though, right? So you can support Joe Biden. Like, if for some people their choice may be Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and they're like, okay, well, if I had to choose between the two, I'll pick Joe Biden. That doesn't mean that you agree with the way that Joe Biden is handling this conflict. But he keeps interchanging, like Hamas. He's saying Hamas as if Hamas are the civilians. Those babies that were connected to those incubators in those hospitals are not Hamas. Okay. So this is, again, another shill trying to make excuses for this war, this slaughter, and for the U.S. government continuing to give weapons and aid to Israel to essentially commit a genocide. We all see what's happening here. We all know the Palestinian people have been occupied for decades. We all know that these people don't even have freedom to move within the Gaza Strip. Like, we all understand this. We know what this is really about.
I actually think those are the key numbers in that poll.
But you're not. Do you want to make the case that this polling is signs of good things to come?
The case I'm making is, if you look at, will Democratic voters vote for Donald Trump or President Biden? If you look at that poll, what's clear is that President Biden is actually quite strong, and that they will continue to stand behind the president, Democratic primary voters. That's the key number, I believe, in that poll. Listen,
No, I'm sorry. I have to point this out that I think is important here. You know, what you have to focus on is how likely are they to come out to vote, right? When Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump, like, people just thought, oh, Hillary Clinton's going to win this in a landslide. There's no way Donald Trump is going to win. When it came time to vote, though, the people that needed to come out in those key states, those battleground states, they didn't come out in support of Hillary. That's why Hillary Clinton lost. She won the popular vote, but she didn't win the states that she needed to win to actually win the election. That's the same issue I see coming for Joe Biden. It doesn't matter to me if he has 77% among Democrats in that poll. What matters is, what states do those voters live in? Because let's be real, that's what this comes down to. It comes down to the battleground states. So what states do they live in? If they don't live in those battleground states, that doesn't really matter. If Joe Biden doesn't win Michigan, he loses, period. That's the reality. That's the problem with some of those polls and the way some people look at it and things like that. Like, you really need to know that this comes down to key states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, They've now added Georgia as a swing state. I still think Georgia is a red state, but whatevs. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada. You might want to keep an eye on Nevada too, because I saw in another race, it looks like Nevada's leaning more towards the Republican side. So this is why I'm saying, like, and Arizona, I believe, is the other one. That's what it comes down to. So the thing is, it's not so much of, oh, is Joe Biden going to win California? Is Joe Biden going to win Massachusetts? Is Joe Biden going to win those states? When it really comes down to it, none of that matters. It doesn't matter if he wins the typical blue Democrat states. If he does not win those battleground states, he loses. This is the piece that Josh isn't going to tell you. That's the piece that he's leaving out. You don't know who that 77% is, and you don't know where those people live.
Nobody wants to see this conflict happening, right? And nobody wants it. But the bottom line is, I saw footage last week from GoPros and from Hamas's GoPros and from their phone footage that was screened, as you know, in private for many members of Congress. What happened, the atrocities that happened that day on October 7th, the lengths and depths they went to, including raping women, young women and girls before they killed them. And we saw imagery that I'll never be able to unsee, including decapitating people and burning people like this.
Why are they still talking about the like, hasn't this been debunked like multiple times? We don't know. This is the thing, guys. I really want people to start thinking outside the box. I want us to think about what we do know as fact and what we do not know. Do we know for a fact that those things happened? Do we? I don't see this anywhere. No evidence of this anywhere. When we go back and we talk back like about ISIS, we could actually go back and say, oh, yes, there were video footages of some of these things happening, right? Do we have video footage of this, right? Have we seen this anywhere? No, we haven't. We know that they've lied about the number. 1 minute they said 1,400 people. Now they're saying it's 1,200 people. So what do we know? What do we really know, right? So if you were in a court of law, could you say that you have enough evidence to prove that this is fact? And I think that's how we need to start looking at this. When we hear commentary from people like Josh Gottenheimer and some of the other people that are establishment shills that are obviously going to try to do whatever they can to back the state of Israel because they don't want to lose their seat. They don't want to have a challenger come up against them like AIPAC is trying to do against Rashida Tlaib and some others. We need to ask ourselves that question. Do we have the evidence to prove that without a shadow of doubt, those events took place? That's how we're going to start looking at these things from now on.
Stuff that you saw, the lengths that Hamas, a terrorist organization, went to, you have to kill and crush them or they will keep coming back, as they admit to. Right? Hamas's leadership admits there'll be a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th October 7th. So they will keep coming. You have to stop them now. Listen, and they're the ones, Hamas is the ones putting innocent Palestinians in harm's way. They're the ones doing it. And our goals are very clear. We have to get the hostages out. We've got to get them home, especially Americans, got to get them home. We've got to make sure we get humanitarian aid into the region, which I strongly support. And we've got to get an aid package passed to do that. And we've got to get that done. And of course, we've got to kill and crush the terrorists.
Yeah.
I would say that the state of Israel and people like Netanyahu actually put the Palestinian people in harm's way by occupying them, controlling how much water, how much food they get, what type of food they get, controlling the land, the air, and the sea, keeping people trapped in this open air prison where they can't even leave willingly if they want to. I would say that they actually put the Palestinian people in jeopardy and in danger when they allow them to have like 90% of their water is dirty water. You know how many different diseases that you can develop, that you can catch from having unclean water? But that's just me. I have the video where Khanna was schooled, and this could be part of the reason that his decision changed as well. This woman that called into this conference call with Khanna, she really schooled him. Really schooled him. I think someone mentioned it already in the comment. Peter said that woman tore him apart. Yes, she did. Here it is. It says anti-Zionist Jewish woman grills Khanna on his pro-Israel stance. You got to hear this to believe it, folks. Here we go.
Have been really kind to you, and I'm a Jewish American, and even though I'm Jewish, my white skin protects me in this country, so I'm going to lay it out to you. You're being a mealy-mouthed politician talking out both sides of your mouth. Israel has lost the right to defend itself in this case. This did not begin October 7th. As you probably know, apartheid has existed since Israel has existed in 1948. Like the United States of America, Israel is a white settler colonialist state, and Palestinians deserve a right to return to their homeland. You talk about the majority of your constituents. You're not listening to the majority of your constituents. You are listening to big tech, to the war machine in Silicon Valley, and to maybe some people who have time before this whole crisis began to call your office and have your ear. I know how politics works. Obviously, you are not going to unwound your heart for us. So we're just going to say this. We can't run someone against you at this time because that's closed in November. But your seat in 2026 is not yours. It's
So what she did, she threatened his seat. She let him know, like, look, your seat is not yours. It's not yours. So this is one of Khanna's constituents. This isn't Jose Vega. This is one of Khanna's own constituents letting him know, I see you. Well, she goes on.
2026 is not yours. It's ours. And right now it's ours too. Your presidential ambitions are done. Your Senate ambitions are done. If you do not call for a ceasefire now, which is the leadership we need, you will not hold public office again in your next election. So thank you for your time, and thank you for showing to us who you actually are in your non-action. And I'll say one last thing. If you actually wanted to call for the bombings, put forward a resolution. Do it tomorrow. If you actually want something besides the ceasefire, put your actions into words and write a resolution so the rest of your colleagues that you're talking about will sign on to an end to the bombing. Thank you, Kareem.
So what was funny when I first saw this, I was like, is Khanna frozen? But he's not frozen. He's just not moving. That's how you got to tell them, guys. This is what you have to say to them. You're their constituents. They're supposed to work for you. You don't have to reelect them. You don't have to, a lot of these politicians that have been in office for, I would say, at least 2 terms, I think they've gotten kind of comfortable and they think they're just owed re-election. They think the people that voted for them last time are just going to come back out and vote for them again just because. No, we have the right to say no to you, and we have the right not to show up at all. And I think that's what's going to happen to some of these people that have gotten a little comfortable in their seat. And I think Khanna is comfortable too. Notice she called out his presidential ambitions, because we all know that it's obvious that Khanna is considering at some point possibly running for president. Obviously not in 2024, but I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to do it in 2028. And she called that out and let him know, yeah, this is all done.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Congressman, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us. As you can see, we care deeply about this issue. We want the resolution.
I would just say, I strongly disagree with the last person, because I believe America is the greatest country in the world. I love this country, and I don't.
I'm sorry, just the way it ended was kind of funny. Oh my God. The Oracle said, Sabby, it's called fear stricken. Oh my God. Yes. What a doozy. I guess she told him. She definitely told him. Now there's a little bit more here, because even Joy Reid, even she, and this is coming from CJ, posted this. CJ, my comrade from RBN, said Palestine-Israel conflict is dividing the world. A surprising segment on MSNBC. Former State Department Naira Haq and former CIA director talk global Palestine sympathy. The U.S. is being isolated from the global South, colonialism in Africa, global South, and how Africa is the future. Listen to this. I was really surprised to see this from Joy Reid.
This conflict between Israel and Gaza has divided not just the region, but the entire world. And we're seeing a stark contrast in just how different world leaders are responding to the conflict. President Biden, in an op-ed this weekend in the Washington Post, doubled down on his full support for Israel and his opposition to a ceasefire, even as Israel's ground assault in the Gaza Strip continued, with forces entering a second hospital and with the death toll in Gaza now topping 13,000. Biden's stance places him at odds with parts of his own coalition at home, and with the French president and Irish leaders, and with many non-European nations who are echoing the ceasefire calls that we're seeing on American campuses in protests and from groups like Jewish Voice for Peace. The president of South Africa last week filed a referral to the International Criminal Court for an investigation into what he calls war crimes being committed by Israel in Gaza. This conflict highlights what has been a growing rift between what's called the global South and the West, whose post-World War II order, led by the U.S., has largely produced wealth and political stability for Europe, with obvious huge exceptions like Ukraine, but that for over a century has delivered colonialism, slavery, and exploitation for resource-rich but economically poor developing countries in what we used to call the Third World, particularly in Africa, whose countries have faced constant wars, coups, and political unrest. But in just a matter of years, they are expected to be a major global powerhouse. As the New York Times writes, the population there is projected to nearly double to 2.
I just want to say something here about Africa becoming a major global powerhouse. If European countries didn't rob Africa many years ago, Africa would have been a global powerhouse a long time ago. The royal family has a lot of stolen wealth.
2.5 billion over the next quarter century, an era that will not only transform many African countries, experts say, but also radically reshape the relationship with the rest of the world. Joining me now is Naira Haq, former senior advisor for the State Department, former White House senior director and MSNBC columnist, and John Brennan, former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security analyst. Thank you both for being here. Naira, it is a shifting world, and the Israel conflict, I think, it didn't start it, it just highlights it, because there definitely is a difference between the way the global South feels about the conflict and the way the U.S. and most of Europe, accepting the leaders of France and Ireland, feel about it. Talk a little bit about why that matters and how that will impact other issues that the U.S. has around the world.
So much of what we hear right now about the United States as a global power is falling on the ears of a generation that has grown up in the wake of 9/11, U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that had devastating consequences for the Middle East and throughout the United States as well, whether it be civil rights or just a broader understanding of what it means to.
She froze for a minute.
Frozen.
Sorry.
Okay, we're gonna let the interwebs get themselves together. We love a little technical difficulty, so we're gonna let that work out. I'm gonna go to you, John Brennan.
Why do they say stuff like this? Why do they say things like we love a little bit of a technical difficulty? No, you don't. No one loves a technical difficulty.
You know, when my father was a young man growing up in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there was this sort of contest between Moscow and Washington over who was going to get the young men of the continent in these newly liberated countries that had been beset by colonialism. And, you know, what Belgium did to the Congo, 20 million people dead, lots of bad feelings with the West. But the West basically won the contest largely for young African men to come. Barack Obama's father, lots of people came to the United States, were educated here, and the West kind of was winning that war. Now it seems it's kind of going the other way. China recently welcomed Arab and Muslim foreign ministers on talks on ending the war in Gaza. This is the quote from the Associated Press today. China's top diplomat welcomed the ministers from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinian Authority, and Indonesia to Beijing, saying his country would work with our brothers and sisters in the Arab and Islamic world to try to end the war in Gaza as soon as possible. You've had Chinese and Russian officials visiting African nations, cultivating relationships. You've had a real resistance to jumping on board the pro-Ukraine stance in lots of African nations. And now the same thing is happening with more African nations siding with Gaza. Is the U.S. becoming isolated from this global South, which is going to represent a huge portion of the economy in the coming years?
Yes. And I'm actually surprised that this has not happened sooner. Other countries are becoming very tired of the United States always trying to be the dominant power and prevent any other country from having that same success. They're tired of it. The US government has exploited a lot of these countries. They've stolen from a lot of these countries, not just the royal family. They've stolen resources. They've destroyed a lot of these countries. These people are tired of being demolished and beaten down by the West. Listen to what he says.
Well, I think, as you point out, Joy, there is growing sentiment in the third world, in the developing world, that there is this concern that the United States and the West has been exploiting these countries for many, many years. And now, unfortunately, given that we have seen for the past 6+ weeks in Gaza, the continued civilian deaths that have taken place as a result of Israeli strikes, I think it's generating a lot of sympathy, empathy for the Palestinian people who have been on their own quest for nationhood and statehood. So I think a lot of people, especially in Africa, that have had to struggle for decades in the past number of years for their own statehood, they can relate to that. But I do.
Of course, they can relate to it. Guys, again, think about who this message is coming from. This is the former CIA director.
I think that they see this, the bloodshed, the pain, the suffering of individuals, and they see it at the hands, quite frankly, of an advanced country such as Israel that is supported and backed by the West. Israel is advanced economically, technologically, a big, powerful military against the Palestinian people. So I think it's being seen through that prism that this is something that, again, the West is responsible for. And there's not the same understanding of the years of conflict that really have, I think, beset this part of the world.
I wanted to pause that part there because notice he mentioned that this is something that the West is responsible for. And these are the things that people are starting to see. I wanted to fast forward to when she came back. Sorry. There we go.
Naira, let's talk about, I think one of the big issues that I've seen people talk about is the coltan issue in Democratic Republic of Congo, what people call a slow motion genocide. The fact that the resources under the feet of people in Africa are riches. You know, they sort of describe the Africa sort of it's all Wakanda. They've all got gold and coltan and oil and everything else, but they don't profit from it. The West relies on it, sucks those resources out and becomes super rich. They get really nothing for it. And so how does that end up getting rebalanced? Can the West rebalance this relationship and allow these countries to profit more from their own resources in a way that makes things more equal?
The way that you bring back that balance, Joy, is the West has to stop stealing their resources. I mean, it's as simple as that. Stop taking their gold. Stop taking their minerals, stop taking their silver, stop taking their diamonds. You stop stealing their resources. You keep your hands out of their country. You stop removing their leaders. You stop the regime change wars. You leave these countries alone. And if you leave these countries alone, you will see that they will be able to grow and thrive without you. That's what you do. Problem is, the US government doesn't want those countries to grow and thrive. The US government wants those countries to fail because the US wants to be the dominant power. It doesn't want another country to be able to compete economically. Now, for all the people that preach to me and say that capitalism is great and free market is amazing, for who? Who does the free market actually work for when you have one country trying to dominate and dictate to other countries what they can and cannot do, meanwhile stealing their resources from them to constantly keep them at the bottom? Listen to what she says.
And should they do it? Because it seems that they're definitely losing the hearts and minds.
When we're talking about the entire colonial structure, right, and what's been left afterwards, in which colonialists, mostly the West, some of what we now see as Spain and Hispanic, but also part of this colonial project, that they went into countries, they took over, they also raised up a group of indigenous people to be the effective overseers. That's who's left in charge of many of these countries, whether it be Afghanistan or the Congo. And so you now have this power class that is deeply corrupt, is also deeply invested in benefiting personally from the extraction. And we don't have an international regime that is good at addressing that. So we talk about democracy and how expanding democracy will bring human rights to many countries. That's not the reality on the ground for many places, where democracy is also synonymous with massive corruption. If you look at global surveys, you see not only that the majority of the African continent is under the age of 25 years old, you also find that they are some of the people with the least resources and least access.
Well, I won't say least. They have the resources, but I agree with her with the access part. They don't have access to those resources.
This is a very important conversation. I want to keep having it, and so I'm glad we got a chance to get it started tonight. Naira, thank you. I'm glad you were released from the spell of the demons of technology. Thank you. I'm glad you were here. And
she's so dramatic. The demons of technology. But pay close attention, folks, to what's happening. That conversation would not have happened, would not be possible. The things that you heard on MSNBC, plus they're really hurting for ratings, would not be possible if it were not for the massive protests that have been happening constantly since October 7th. There was a protest during the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade today. So when you have that many people come out in the streets, they can't ignore it. They have to acknowledge that the Palestinian people have been living through this occupation. They've been oppressed. They've been beat down. They've been given dirty water. They've been treated like animals. And you know what? I applaud everyone that came to the protest. I've been to the protest as well. Everyone that's speaking out about it, because, we're going to look back on this day, one day in history. We'll look back at this one day on history, and we'll be able to say, you know what? I'm glad we were out there in the streets and we pushed back against the propaganda. Because imagine what they would be spewing from their mouths had it not been for the enormous impact, the enormous pushback from the American people out in the streets, actually internationally, people all over the world. Imagine what they would be saying. Imagine what they would be getting away with right now. Do you think those Congress members would have signed on for a ceasefire had it not been for the people in the streets, the protesters out there fighting? Always remember that. Always remember it's the outside effort that is going to put pressure on them. Voting for them is not putting pressure on them. Have to remember that. I'm going to go to the comments, and then we're going to get to this story about Andrew Tate and Piers Morgan. Whoo! man, that's a heated one. So hold on to your seat. Get popcorn if you have some. This is a moment. Angela says, hi, everyone. The DNC gave Ro Khanna the permission to call for a ceasefire. They know their odds of winning in 2024 are not good. Bingo, Angela. That's why I was saying, like, who gave him permission? Tia says, yet Israel knows that Hamas is supposedly underground, but continues bombing hospitals. Exactly. The number of times they keep saying they're in the tunnels. Okay, so why didn't you go into the tunnels? Why are you doing all this other stuff above the ground? The Oracle says these people kill me, conflating the civilians of Gaza with Hamas. They are not one of the same. True. Louise says, and I learned an important lesson yesterday. Do not try to discuss Palestine with people who get their news from Facebook. Oh my God, don't even get me started, Louise. Don't even get me started. No, don't even try. They all over the place. EMK said he got pimp smacked. Emily to John, detransition vlog. Sorry, they're my words. This is the Karen, let me see the manager energy we need. Thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. They only know lies, even with technical difficulties. And thank you for the super chat, Chango. Sabby, a lot is happening in Africa. I wish you would cover that part of the world in comparison to the West. Yes, I will be covering that next week. I actually have someone coming on to dive into what's going on in the Congo. Because it has been a while since I've covered Africa. But yeah, I'll be doing that next week when I get back from